I have been making videos on YouTube for almost 4 years now, and I have wanted to film this video for a very long time, but I didn't quite know exactly what I wanted to say, and so I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And now I've gotten to the point that I just want to talk about it. Even though I don't know exactly what I want to say and it might not come out perfect, I feel like it's time. It's time to talk about it, and I'm ready. So in today's video, I'm going to be telling you my story about addiction and debt. Addiction is a controversial topic, and so I just ask you guys, please, if you have nothing nice to say, just don't say anything at all. Don't leave nasty comments on this video. It's not that I can't take hate comments, it's that anybody else who's watching this, who's struggling with addiction, if they see those comments, it's gonna be very discouraging for them. And that's not the purpose of this video. I want anybody who's struggling to be really encouraged by this video. My drug addiction story has a very happy, inspirational ending. So anybody who's watching this, I want them to be inspired in every way about this video, not discouraged. So please just keep it to yourself if you have nothing nice to say. A couple comments on drug addiction before I get into the details of the video. So drug addiction is something that if you don't struggle with it and you've never struggled with it, you probably don't understand it. In fact, I think it's almost impossible for you to understand what it's like to be addicted to drugs if you haven't experienced it yourself. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around drug addicts, that drug addicts are just having fun and they could just choose to stop at any time, and that they're just making bad decisions. And that's really not the case. Over 70% of drug addicts have experienced some sort of trauma in their life that has led to them becoming drug addicts. It is very rare that there's a just perfectly normal, healthy person who is happy that tries a drug and then is addicted. There's usually, it's much more complicated than that. But once you're in it, once you're addicted, it is so hard to get out, especially on your own. Most people need help to stop using drugs. So I struggled with drug addiction for around 8 years. And I say 8 years, but just honestly, it wasn't every single day of my life for 8 years. Every addict is different and every story looks a little bit different. So for me, I struggled on and off for 8 years, and it really came to a head at the end of that 8 years, where the last, 4, 5, 6 months of that was the worst of it. But up until that last 5 or 6 months of my drug addiction, I was a functioning addict. I was a very high functioning addict. So I started using drugs basically after high school and used all throughout college and law school. And then after I passed the bar exam, I had a quarter life crisis basically at age 26 and just had a total breakdown and ended up in rehab about 9 months after I passed the bar exam. I'm not gonna get into the specifics about my addiction because I don't think that's helpful, and that's not something that I want to share. But suffice it to say that when I went to rehab, I had to go to detox first. And detox is a place you go if you can't go right to rehab because you are addicted to something that would be dangerous to stop just on its own. And so you have to go to detox and medically detox for a period of time. I think I was there for a week or 10 days before I went to a 30-day inpatient rehab treatment center. I only went to rehab once, and I don't think that's that common. I think a lot of addicts take multiple trips to rehab and multiple relapses to finally stop using. For me, it was a long, slow burn. It was this long period of time in my life where drugs were in the background controlling big parts of my life and my mental health. And over time, it got worse and worse until I got to the point where I went to rehab. It wasn't like I started out day one doing drugs all day long, every single day, and wasn't able to keep up the rest of my life. Like I said, I graduated college with good grades. I graduated law school. I hid it from a lot of my friends and family. A lot of my friends and family to this day, this video may be how some people are finding out. And that's okay. I'm sorry if this is how you're finding out. Because I was so afraid of so many things, but mostly just like that this wasn't a life I was allowed to have. This was a life that I was supposed to be the good kid, getting the good grades, going to be a lawyer, getting a good job, doing everything right, doing everything good on paper. But I always felt like I was living this double life where I was suffering and struggling in the background and hanging out with people I shouldn't be hanging out with and getting into bad situations and stuck. I didn't want to be there, but it was the only thing I knew how to do to get through because I was so supremely unhappy in life. And so drugs were the thing that I turned to for comfort and allowed me to keep going. It's strange because drugs are so destructive, but then in a weird way, that's what kept me going for parts of my life when I felt like I had nothing else in life to look forward to or enjoy. Like I said, I had passed the bar exam and then totally just fell apart. Looking back, I never wanted to go to law school, but once I was in it, I felt like I had to finish, and once I finished, I felt like, well, you have to take the bar and practice law because you've now got $160,000 of debt that you need to pay off, and how the hell are you gonna pay that off if you can't get a high-paying job? And I didn't know what else there was to do with a law degree that you could make good money right away besides being a lawyer. But I didn't want to do it. After rehab, I was so broken. I couldn't. I had been on a drug binge for months. I had lost 30 pounds. Like, just so you have a sense of how bad this was, I lost 30 pounds. And when I started, I was a weight similar to what I am now. So like 5'5" and 130 pounds. So it was bad. It was really scary. And like, I'm not gonna lie, looking back, there were a lot of really fun times, and that's why I kept going back to it. But at the end of the day, drug addiction is you sitting alone in a room by yourself with drugs and your life totally fucked up. And that's not something I would wish on my worst enemy. So after rehab, I was totally broken. I was like trying to get my physical health back, my mental health back. I was struggling to stay sober. I was struggling to not do drugs, and that consumed me for years. The recovery to my body and my mental health, it consumed me, and I wanted nothing to do with practicing law. And I worked at a restaurant for a number of years then, and that honestly, like, the early days were hard, but after I kind of got out of it, those were some of the best days of my life. I am so nostalgic about that time in my life because I for the first time had a life that I was building, that I felt happy, that I wasn't doing some educational or professional pursuit that I didn't want to be doing, that didn't feel like me, that didn't feel like something that fit with who I was. I felt like I was moving closer to who I was for once rather than further away. My job was low pressure and I had space and time to recover. Money-wise, fortunately for me, during active addiction, I was so committed to hiding it that I kept it in control enough that I never went into debt because of my drug addiction. I always figured out a way to manage whatever money I had along with my addiction and without going into any debt. I knew enough not to do like cash advances on credit cards and stuff like that. During the last few months, the worst part of my addiction, there was some financial damage, but because it was a shorter period of time, it was something that still, it wasn't something I took out debt to handle. It came out of savings accounts, and all the money that I was making, I just was basically paying rent and then not paying for nothing else, and everything else was, you know, going towards drugs. And so financially, after I came out of rehab, I was totally broke. Like, I had nothing. And I had my student loans, but I wasn't in a pile of debt from the drug addiction. It didn't not affect me financially. I wasn't able to save money, build wealth, invest, pay off debt, any of that. At that time when I came out of rehab, I was 26 years old. So when I compare myself to people who are in their mid-20s or early 30s and have done these amazing things financially, and I feel insecure, I need to remember that, like, my story is different than theirs. My life is different from theirs. At 26, I was in rehab. Like, it's just not possible for me to have made the same smart, financial, responsible decisions that they made in the position that I was in. And I've had to work really hard to come to accept that about my life and myself, and not feel ashamed or badly or compare myself to other people who are ahead of me at my same age or ahead of me and younger than me. But as you can imagine, working at a restaurant, I wasn't making a ton of money, and so I put my student loan debt, which then had ballooned. I don't even know how much it was at that point. I think the interest compounded and it just kept doing that for a long time. So I think my student loans were maybe at like 160 or 180. The worst they got to was $220,000 before I actually started paying them down. And so they just kept ballooning and ballooning because I was on income-based repayment, and so my payment was like zero for a while because I was making such little money, and then it, you know, slowly over time got higher and higher, but for a long time it was very small, so it wasn't even making a dent in the interest, let alone touching the principal for many years. About 3 years after rehab, I had recovered enough to be like, okay, I am in a bad spot financially. And I was married, I still am, and my husband was working at the time as well, but he had decided he wanted to go back to school and get his master's in business. So we were in a situation where I was making barely any money. He was about to go back to school and take on more debt. And I had this degree that I hated, but could potentially make us money and get us out of this situation, or help get us out of this financial situation that I had a big hand in creating by me going and practicing law. So I did that for 6 years. And during that 6 years, it was very difficult because I was back doing something that I hated, that I had been running away from. But this time I didn't have drugs to turn to because I had stepped away from that. I had moved on, I had recovered, and it was always going to be part of me, but it was something that I knew I wasn't going to go back to. The recovery from that was so hard. I knew that I didn't want that life again. I had seen the other side and seen what life could be like in a lot of ways, and I wanted to try to have a baby and be a mom and live that life. And there was no way that I was willing to even consider trying to have a child that was mine to take care of if there was any inkling of any hint of anything in my mind that I would ever touch a drug ever again. So I had closed that in my mind. I knew that I was done. I was not going to touch drugs again. And I wanted to have a kid. We were in so much debt and my husband was going back to school. So I went back and I practiced law for 6 years, and like I said, it was very, very difficult emotionally because I was back in a high stress environment that I didn't want to be in, doing work I didn't enjoy, and my addiction came back in a different way. It came out as a shopping addiction, and I would just spend recklessly because we were in such a bad financial situation and I felt so hopeless about it. I needed something. I felt like I needed something to get me through, and I couldn't turn to drugs, so I turned to shopping, and I would shop and buy shit that I didn't need and like thought would make me feel better, thought would fill that hole inside of me that never was going to be filled by spending money. And I got into $30,000 of credit card debt. So it wasn't all just me. It was some of my husband. It was some, you know, things we didn't have enough money saved for maintenance on our home, and so we put things on a credit card. And we were, you know, like I said, he was not working, he was in school for a period of time. We had 2 car payments. We had our rent and then later our mortgage when we bought a house. We had my student loans, we had his undergrad student loans, we had credit cards. I mean, there wasn't enough to go around, and we weren't keeping up with the debt, and so it just felt hopeless. So it's like, well, if it feels hopeless, what's $50 more gonna do? What's $100 more gonna do? I can't see a way out of this right now, so I'm not gonna worry about it. I'm gonna make the minimum payments, and I'm just gonna buy stuff that makes me feel happy, even if it's temporary, because I need that to get through right now. I eventually did get pregnant at age 31, and my daughter was born when I was 32, so she's 2.5 now. And what I haven't shared is that when I struggled with infertility for those 2 years, I blamed myself a lot for that because of what I had put my body through. I felt like, was this my fault? Was all the damage I did to my body over the years now coming back to bite me? And the one thing that I really wanted in this world since I was like little was to be a mom, and was I not going to be able to have that because of the drug addiction and the damage that I had done. And it was really hard, and I wish I had talked about it as I was going through it. I wish I had talked about that back then, but it was just so painful to think about, and I didn't know if that story was going to have a happy ending, and luckily it did. Luckily I have a healthy, beautiful, wonderful daughter, but I didn't know at the time. And it's really hard not to blame yourself for the things that you did to your body that, you know, you don't know what damage that does. You don't know what effect that has on you on a long-term basis. I still don't know. I still don't know. I still don't know if I'll end up with Alzheimer's or something later on in life at a younger age because of decisions I made when I was 20 years old. But it's something that I have to accept, and now I'm probably too far in the other direction. I spend a lot of money on groceries, buying like everything organic. And I honestly feel like part of me is trying to make up for all those years where I just put chemicals in my body, and I'm trying to undo that damage by eating so healthy all the time. So after my daughter was born, my husband had graduated from his MBA program. He was working, I was working, and we finally were able to sit down and tackle our debt for the first time. She was born in May of 2019, and in January of 2020, we said enough is enough, and we dedicated to getting our debt paid off. And we have been paying off our debt, and I've been posting videos multiple times a month talking about it for the last year or so. But over the past almost 2 years now, we have been paying down our debt. And as of next month, we'll have paid off $100,000 of debt. And I'm just so grateful to be where I am now. And I still have really hard days, really bad days, and I go to therapy and I work on myself constantly, and it's not easy at all. But I feel grateful that I lived through it and I got to the other side and I got the life that I always wanted. As hard as it is to be in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt still, it could have been so much worse. And it makes me sick when I think about what could have been and the bad outcomes that could have happened and what I could have lost because of drug addiction. Okay, let me pull it together. Drug addiction ruins your life in ways that you can't even imagine. There was a long period of time, and it still happens sometimes, where I felt like I'll never feel true happiness again, because when you're on drugs, it gives you a level of happiness that you can't even imagine. And you can get it by just putting a substance into your body and you're immediately there. You're immediately there. Whether it's for 5 seconds or for an hour or for 5 hours, you're there. But the thing is, when it wears off, it's the worst feeling in the world. And if you are in recovery or you struggle with addiction, the thing that helped me recover the most, one of the things that helped me recover the most is, as you're thinking about your drug use, don't remember those high highs. Think about those low lows. Only think about the low lows. Don't let yourself go there and think about those highs, because if you think about the highs, you'll be chasing it for the rest of your life until you die or end up in jail. That's the only outcome if you keep chasing that. You have to remember the low that comes after that. You have to remember the damage that comes from all of those moments of artificial happiness. I'm sharing this for a lot of reasons, for myself and for you guys, but the main one is that I make personal finance content, and mental health is undeniably linked to personal finance. And the different skills and things that I learned during my road to recovery from drug addiction are so applicable to just mental health in general and to finances. I mean, look at what happened. I was addicted to drugs, and then I became addicted to shopping. And some people are addicted to food, or some people get addicted to not eating in order to control things around them. And it all impacts how we live our life on a day-to-day basis and how we manage our money on a day-to-day basis. So I'm hoping to use my experience that I went through to help other people in understanding how to get their finances under control, because there are so many parallels between having no control over how you're managing your money and being in an out of control state with drug addiction. So I will leave you with the biggest piece of advice that got me through recovery from drug addiction, that got me through recovery from shopping addiction, and that has gotten me through my debt payoff journey. And that is, take things one day at a time. You may have heard that phrase before, and that's something that comes from AA. That comes from Alcoholics Anonymous. Take things one day at a time. Stay sober just for today. If you can just not shop just for today, if you can just make good financial decisions just for today, that's all you have to do. Don't think about next week. Don't think about next year. Don't think about how many years it's going to take you to get out of the financial hole you're in. Don't think of how many years it's going to take you to get to the place where you can take that sigh of relief, where you can take that breath, where you can feel like, okay, I'm good financially, or where you can feel like, okay, I'm thriving financially. Don't think far ahead. Just stay in today, just stay in the present, and take it one day at a time. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon in my next video. Bye.